This morning we're going to, I think, probably the second most famous landmark in all of France, which is of course the Versailles Palace, originally established as a hunting lodge by Louis XIII in the late 1500s, I believe, maybe early 1600s. In any case, under Louis XIV, the hunting lodge was expanded and turned into one of the biggest palaces in all of Europe. Since Versailles is one of the most popular attractions, it should come as no surprise that the line to get in reflects that. Now you can buy tickets that allow you to skip the line, but you have to buy those in advance. On the flip side, if you come on the first Sunday of the month, apparently they're free. So, though we have a line, you don't have to pay for it. Full credit to the people here. We got through that line extremely quickly, and we are now just inside the gates. Pretty spectacular so far, though my mom described it as gaudy, so I guess it's a matter of taste. Certainly, there's a lot of gold everywhere. You can see how the poor in France might have felt. A little bit like the wealth inequality was too oppressive. Any case, like I said, this was a hunting lodge, but the nobles of the court felt that that did not befit a king when Louis XIII moved the court here. So Louis XIV, the Sun King, expanded it quite a bit into its present state. Now, interestingly, the reason that Louis XIV brought his court out here wasn't just because he loved hunting, though I'm sure that was part of it. Instead, it was to try to draw the nobles away from their provincial power bases, because he'd felt that the Ancien regime needed to become a little more federalized. He felt he was losing control of his nobles, he lost his ability to tax effectively, and he wanted to make sure he could restore the royal revenues where they should be for a country as rich as France. In the entry hall here, we see all the kings and queens of France throughout the ages. Statues of their likenesses. And brief descriptions of when they reigned. As you'd expect, the rooms of Louis XIV, quite popular. And with good reason. With some of the most interesting art. This is the upper floor of the chapel we saw earlier. Now, it's important to remember that kings in Europe, for most of history, were itinerant. They didn't stay in one palace for long. They had to move around because it was only their personal authority, their personal presence, that actually united the realm. It wasn't the same idea of a nation state that we have today. So Louis XIV really broke from tradition by creating this palace because it locked him into one place full time. French kings at this period in time were not like the British kings with whom most Americans are familiar. These were absolute monarchs, which was part of what enabled him to build such an amazing drain on French resources. I mean, the manpower, the money, all that this took, it's monumental. And whereas in England, the king would have had to ask a parliament to grant him some of the money, in France, the king did not need to ask twice. And here is the most famous hall in all the world, most likely, the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. This room has seen at least two major treaties. The Treaty of Paris, though not the one signed by the Americans, which was signed in, where would that be, in Paris, as opposed to Versailles. And also, of course, the Treaty of Versailles, which is the treaty that hamstrung Germany after World War I and eventually caused World War II. It's considered by many to be the most beautiful area of a building in the world, and it is pretty spectacular. So this is the king's actual bedchamber, not just the show chamber we saw earlier. The bedrooms are very popular here, as you can see. This one's the Queen's bedroom. For Queen Maria Theresa, I'm fairly certain. We are now in the French Museum, part of the Versailles. We're still in the Versailles. Great man. This room is pretty amazing if you're a fan of French Revolutionary history, like I am, because it's all the generals. So, see Comte de Rochambeau right there. Behind on the corner, Lazare Hoche, the man responsible for pacifying the Vendée region. Oh, Jean-Claude Pichegru, very important in the battle with the Germans on the Rhine, well, against German principalities. Oh, Jean-Baptiste Jourdan. I mean, this is a veritable who's who. I want to say Jean-Baptiste Kléber over here. He was with Napoleon on the Egypt expedition. Those are some of the ones I've seen just right off the bat. And of course Napoleon himself, along with some of his most famous lieutenants, like General Murat, first king of Naples. And I think this may actually be the Marquis de Lafayette. So the Gallery of Battles, a room similarly impressive to the Hall of Mirrors, though of course far less famous, was established by Louis Philippe. Of course, the new king, after the revolutionary period, wanted to add his own stamp to the French imagination. So these paintings depict famous battles that helped define the new French state. Battle of Austerlitz, very famous victory by Napoleon, and so on. So, sort of humorously, they've got some American history up here as well. C.G. Yorktown, George Washington, and General Rochambeau. From the outside, the building is no less impressive. And of course, the gardens are ginormous. I mean, it's amazing. Schönbrunn, I always thought was like the biggest, most extravagant palace with the most extravagant gardens and all that. But Versailles sort of puts it to shame. You can see why it's the standard for royal palaces in Europe, and why it was the home of, you know, so many treaties and events of state for the European powers. Not just because France was centrally located, but because the venue they had just so far surpassed anything anywhere else in Europe. So, go out to the grounds.